Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Baker Institute. There are few people actively involved in politics today who I respect and admire as much as I do tonight's guest. In fact, I strongly agree with those who say that our nation lost a golden opportunity when he was defeated in the 2012 presidential election. With his unique ability to strike the kind of level-headed political bargains needed to move our country forward, he would undoubtedly have made a very, very effective president, one whom those on both sides of the political aisle could have admired if given the chance. He's what I like to call a pragmatic idealist. He's a devout man of strong religious conviction. He subscribes very firmly to the ideals that have made this country of ours great. This is, after all, a politician who once said that he, quote, believes in individual initiative, personal responsibility, freedom, opportunity, small government, and the Constitution. These American principles, he continued, are key to getting our economy back to being successful and leading the world. At the same time, he is a savvy businessman who knows that we judge our elected officials by what they get done for the American people, and not by how many debating points they can score. In many ways, he comes from the same lineage of effective public officials with whom I was fortunate enough to work during my days in Washington. While firmly grounded in values, he appreciates the complexity of the real world of hard choices and painful trade-offs. This, of course, is the world in which we must live, must decide, and must act. But here's one of the very best attributes of tonight's speaker. He refuses to go gently into that good night. At the age of 72, a promising young man, given my age, he's running for the United States Senate to replace Senator Orrin Hatch. If he wins, he will become the oldest freshman senator ever popularly elected to a full term, quite a record. He will also become the third individual to ever serve as governor of a state and United States senator from a different state. Our city, of course, is named after one of the other two. Sam Houston served as the 6th governor of Tennessee and later as a U.S. senator from Texas. And so, ladies and gentlemen, it is a real pleasure for me to introduce tonight's guest, the 70th governor of Massachusetts, the next senator from Utah, and someone I'm very proud to call my friend. He and our founding director, Ambassador Edward Derigian, will have a fireside chat type discussion. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mitt Romney.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. Wow, what a guy. How many cabinet positions did you lead? You led three different cabinets, as well as being chief of staff to the President of the United States, twice. Extraordinary person. What a leader you have here. Amazing man.
Well, Governor Romney, I mean Senator Romney. We have many leadership programs here at Rice University for the students, and it's a theme. I think General Holditz may be here. And like your father, you have a long track record of leadership in both the public and the private sectors. And how is leadership different as being a corporate CEO and being a government official?
You know, I don't know what's as different as you might imagine. it's a different environment to work in. But I think people assume that if you're the CEO, you can sort of do whatever you want to do and you don't report to anybody. But the reality is, if you're in the corporate world, you got bankers you got to worry about, you got shareholders you have to worry about, you have a board of directors, you have people in the company that want your job. So there are constituents you have to be thinking about. And that's true in government as well. You have to find coalitions and be able to get people to work with you. I also think that leadership does not require position. Most of you that are coming out of university, whether it's at the graduate program or undergraduate program, are going to be going in at the bottom level of an enterprise. But you can be a leader from the very bottom of an enterprise by virtue of your character and your principles and the qualities that make people leaders. You can influence the lives of others and encourage people to follow a course of life that you think will be more propitious for them and beneficial for society. So I guess I find leaders, whether at the top of an organization, whether in business or government or not-for-profits and public service, I find leadership all over. I think one of the great realities of America is that people who have come here have tended to be leaders and risk takers, whether first generation or those of us who are descendants of those people. People came here with ambition in their eyes and have taken qualities of leadership which have helped propel our economy and the greatness of our country from its founding.
Excellent. As the Secretary mentioned, you've thrust yourself once again into the world of politics. And the United States is obviously today divided in a very partisan way. We were discussing that in the early days of our republic. There was a lot of partisanship too, but in contemporary times, we've sort of become like tribal in our politics. And the political center seems to have disappeared. I don't know if that's true or not, but what has created this polarization in your mind, Governor, and what can be done to overcome it?
Well, I think a lot of folks assume that the reason that we're seeing the polarization in our society is because of the divided media, that we're not watching the same shows at night, and the right watches Fox and the left watches MSNBC. We don't get the same facts and so forth. But I think it goes back before that. I think what really happened in our economy was a change in how our economy worked, the globalization of our economy, which was inevitable, the automation associated with new technology, immigration, all these features together, globalization, the immigration, automation, and the information age. Actually, all four of these things interacted at such a time that certain portions, certain pockets, substantial pockets, states of our country were severely impacted. And other states found this as a huge opportunity. Certain pockets just took off in terms of their potential and the kind of financial rewards available to entrepreneurs in the information space, for instance, where these opportunities were extraordinary. At the same time, if you're working in the auto industry or the steel industry or other manufacturing sectors of the Midwest, it was devastating. And the people who were leading the country at that time, whether business or government and so forth, just didn't see the impact this was having on American families and really took no corrective action, no substantial corrective action to help those people so disproportionately affected. And I happen to believe that trade and immigration and automation and information age, all these things enhance the overall economy and have led America's economy to power the world in some respects, lead the world at least. And yet, while that happened for some, others were very severely, disproportionately impacted. And we watched it, we said, oh, let the market take care of that. It's like, well, if you're living in Lordstown, Ohio, and the GM factory closes, how's the market going to take care of that? I mean, you can't, who are you going to sell your house to? You got a mortgage, you got a home, you can't sell your house to anybody. The jobs that are available are in places you don't live, require skills you don't have. And it was devastating, and it created a lot of anger. And that anger, I think, has led to people on the left saying, hey, we have an answer. Let's go after these rich folks and make sure that they give more to help those that need the help. And on the right, they said, hey, who is it that's causing it? It's these immigrants that are causing it, and these foreign goods that are causing it. And so we became, if you will, populist on the left, the populist on the right. And media, after all, is a business, and they look to see how they can get more eyeballs to watch their show or to buy their periodical, and they found that if they appeal to one side or the other, they do better than if they just talk down the middle, if they appeal to the anger on both sides, or on one side or the other. So we're following, in my opinion, a natural course which was the failure of our society to deal with the disproportionate pain that was felt in sectors of our economy. And by the way, this is about to happen again. We're about to have enormous changes in the nature of our economy as we go forward as a result of a new level of automation, automobiles that'll be electric, autonomously driven vehicles, and so forth. So we're going to have this happen again, and hopefully we've learned from our failures the last time, or we will become more polarized with more danger associated with that polarization.
Given this polarized situation, would you recommend for young people to go into public service today?
When I was a young guy, I was 15 or 16 when my dad decided to run for governor of the state of Michigan. And he was convinced that there was too much economic power in the hands of a few corporations and in the hands of labor unions. And he thought he had to get in to make a difference, and he jumped in. But I was involved in his campaigns and asked him about politics, and he said, "Mitt, don't get involved in politics unless you're independent financially and your kids are raised." And I asked him, "Why is that?" And he said, "Well, financially, if you have to win elections to pay your mortgage, it may cause you to take votes and to say things that are not right, that don't conform to your principles. And with regards to your kids, if you win an election, your kids will think there's something special and they're not." And and I never imagined, by the way, that I had 5 boys, they'd all be raised, and that I'd become independent financially. But I happened to invest at a time when the stock market was around 1,000. I started a private equity firm and venture capital firm when the stock market was probably around 1,000, and it went up to like 10,000 during my investment experience. If you lose money in a circumstance like that, you're a moron, and I'm not a moron. So I did better than I ever expected, and that opened a door to participate in public service. But for you all, I have to tell you, you serve the country if you're successful in enterprise of any kind, whether you're in a hospital, leading a hospital, or working as a physician or a nurse, whether you're working in the economy at any level, if you're raising a family, you're serving the country. All these things. I mean, we talk about we want to see growth in our GDP. What is GDP? It's a simple mathematical reality. It's the working population times output per person. So if you're working and you're creating output, you're encouraging the GDP of the overall economy. And if you do real well, we're able to use a portion of what you earn to help those that are less fortunate, to build good schools, to care for our elderly. So don't think that only public service is the way you're contributing to the public. So whether it's business or law or labor unions or government, all those places I think have a great value to our society.
I think you're making a very important point. Is there anything we can do to improve the civility in the discourse of our public life today?
I don't have an answer to that. I have to be honest. I can tell you my own limited experience, which is I got elected governor of Massachusetts. My legislature was about 89% Democrat, and it was not lost on me that I would get nothing done if I spent my time attacking the Speaker of the House and the Senate President, because any veto I had would be overridden by a voice vote, as they were regularly. And so I said to my team, and my chief of staff, by the way, when I was governor, is here, Beth Myers. Will you stand up and be recognized? She's my chief of staff. She's here. Thank you. But we got together and we said to our team, look, if we disagree with the Democrats, let's point out why we disagree. But do not, under any circumstances, attack the Democratic leadership in our legislature. And we didn't. And one day I got a note, a little hand-scrawled note while I was in a meeting, and it came from one of the 2 top leaders in the state, and he wrote in there, "I've noted you haven't attacked me in 6 months. I'm going to stop attacking you." And he did. And we got together every Monday for 1 to 2 hours. We'd rotate offices, and we would just talk about what was going on in our respective spheres, what was happening in the state. And it was very interesting. I mean, I remember one time there was a proposal that was backed by organized labor that we all thought would be bad for economic development in the state. But the Senate President and the Speaker were feeling great pressure to push it from their base. And they came to the meeting, they said, Governor, you got to give us more cover. You got to fight harder against this, or we're going to have to do it. And so we had these kinds of meetings together. Nothing ever leaked. Can you imagine? In 4 years, these kinds of meetings every Monday, nothing ever leaked. Maybe it's Pollyannish or just based on my personal experience, but I believe that, well, I know that Democrats love America just as much as Republicans do. And I believe that if we spend more time with each other, sharing and talking, that we'll be able to work together. I sure hope so. That's what's caused me to go after it again.
Hopefully. We wish you success.
Thank you.
Faith has always played an important part in your personal life, your family's life. How has faith influenced and shaped your public life?
Sometimes it's hard for me to be able to look back and say, what causes me to do the things I do? I mean, how am I different than others? Am I the same as everybody else? I've been just reading a book by Rabbi Sachs of Great Britain, and he makes the point that a society without religion will ultimately fail. And he doesn't mean a particular brand of religion, but he talks about the Abrahamic religions of Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, and makes the point that these religions are based upon the premise that all humankind has value, that we are equal in the eyes of our Maker, that when we are caring for someone who is less advantaged, we are doing something good. And these principles have infused the foundation of our country. I mean, I just reading the Federalist Papers again, and given all the interest in the life of Alexander Hamilton, I picked up one of his, great writing accomplishments. In the first Federalist paper, and I can't get it quite right, but he says something like this. He said, the question is, can a government be formed based upon reason and debate, or must we always rely upon accident and power? Because as you think about the history of the world, by accident of birth, you became the next king or the next pharaoh or the next chieftain, and power was how you maintained your position. And the purpose of government was to get as much as possible for the person at the top. And along came the founders of this country that said, no, 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 no. The purpose of government is to provide for all of the people, because we are all equal in the sight of our Maker and in the sight of our government. We are all equal, and the purpose of government is to provide for the life and liberty and pursuit of happiness of all the citizens. This was a fundamental religious concept. It was a sense of value of humankind. And so that's what forms my religious underpinning. I don't think you enact laws based upon a particular religious belief. But I believe that the principles that form our system of government and our legal structure are based upon these Judeo-Christian, Abrahamic covenant type principles in the significance of life and the value of all humankind.
Well, I'm going to jump from religion to President Trump. President Trump has been president now for almost 2 years. And where do you feel that he has succeeded, and where do you feel that he has failed?
I'm not going to make that judgment for all of you. My own view is that on a series of policy fronts, he's been quite successful, and has done much of what Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio or even I would have done with regards to the tax code. I remember debating President Obama, and I said that I thought we had to lower the tax rate, the corporate tax rate, and he agreed with me. Now, he didn't do it after he got reelected, but he agreed with me, because you can't have American corporations taxed at 35% and European corporations taxed at 20% and not have these inversions of companies leaving and taking tax revenue with them as they move their patents and oftentimes their headquarters outside the country, jobs leaving and so forth. So we had to bring our tax rate in line with the global tax rates. Less than 10% of our income tax, or of our tax revenue in total of the government, comes from corporations. So getting that to be a more reasonable tax rate was, I think, the right policy. I also think that in many cases, regulation was so extreme that it was causing distress in our markets. Community banks, for instance, were suffering under Dodd-Frank. Did you notice Republicans and Democrats, you don't hear about this a great deal, but Republicans and Democrats came together and worked out some adjustments to improve Dodd-Frank and passed that, which is, in my opinion, good news. And so this effort to say, and by the way, regulation is essential for an effective capitalist economy, free enterprise economy as ours is. But people who are, corporations that are highly successful would like to create regulation to keep others from attacking them and taking over their business. So some regulation is proposed by corporations to protect themselves. Those are bad regulations. Then there's other regulation which makes the economy work better and more fluidly. Those are good regulations. And so the president's going through and sorting through some of those. On the foreign policy front, I think it's fair that Marco Rubio, Jeb Bush, and perhaps myself would have done the same things that the president has done and said the same things he's done internationally. But gosh, the NAFTA deal has been renegotiated. North Korea hasn't tested any nuclear weapons recently or sent rockets over Japan. And so there's progress on some of those fronts. I think I think many people would agree that part of the job of being a leader is not just creating policy that works, and many of the policies the president's put in place in his first 2 years are ones I fully subscribe to and I think are helpful. But the job of a leader is also shaping the character of the country. And I mean, I look at the people who've shaped the character of America, and I sometimes think, I think what Abraham Lincoln and George Washington and Alexander Hamilton and John Adams and Thomas Jefferson and Ronald Reagan, I think what they did, maybe what they did in terms of shaping the character of the country was more important than what they did in terms of policy. And I think if I've had challenges with the president, it's when he has said something or tweeted something or done something which I think is detrimental to the character of our country. And so I thought the Charlottesville comments, for instance, were unnecessarily divisive. And we are a diverse population. I know there are all these debates. Does diversity make us strong? Does it not? We are a diverse nation. That's who we are. And in a diverse nation, the way we can be strongest is by coming together and putting aside differences to work for the common good. And so things that detract from that, I think, are detrimental to our national character. So I'll point those out, as I have. But I mean, going forward, I hope to support the president on his policies that are good. If I disagree, I'll argue and try and convince him to go a different direction. But the place I think that's really needs greater concentration out of our leaders in Washington, and not just at the White House, but all over the nation and all over our nation's capital, is our concentration on the qualities of character we want in our current population and in the generations to come.
Many have argued that if you can call it the Trump phenomenon, has deeply divided the Republican Party, of which you've been a member for many years, perhaps beyond repair. What do you think is the proper way forward for the Republican Party?
Oh, I don't know that I have a formula for that. I believe that as a party, it's essential for us to appeal not just to our base, but to appeal to people on the other side of the aisle and to the people who are independent and neither party. And I don't think we're doing that as well as we could. I don't think I did that as well as I could have in my campaign. And I've got all sorts of excuses as to why that was. But the reality is, when you're running in a primary, you can imagine, when you're running in a primary, you spend your time, and that's, by the way, most of the campaign time, The years leading up to a race or in the primary, you spend all your time preaching to your base, trying to convince your base to come join you. I spent very little time in African American churches and Hispanic communities in a primary because they're not going to be voting in my primary by and large. And then comes a general election, and you show up at an African American church and they say, "Where have you been?" And they make a good point. Mm-hmm. And so, I think the way forward for our party is to make a much greater effort to show that we are the natural party for people who are Hispanic. That Hispanic voters ought to be voting Republican because we're a party that concentrates on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Life, we protect the life of the unborn. We protect the lives through a strong security network and commitment to our national security. Liberty, we're committed to all the principles of liberty in the Constitution. Right to free press, freedom of association, freedom to bear arms, freedom to practice religion as we will, and pursuit of happiness. We want to give people opportunity. So we're a natural place for minority communities, many of them, that seek that in America, but we've somehow, I think, made them worry about who we are and what we care about by our rhetoric and by things that go on in the primaries. And we've got to do a better job, in my opinion, to reach out to young people, to minorities, to women. And if we don't, my party will be, the strongest party that represents a good 25% of America. That would be a problem.
In that context, Governor, is reaching across the aisle, has it become an oxymoron in American politics today? In my view, political compromise is part of the art of politics, but political capitulation is something any party would want to avoid in terms of its principles. But the art of political compromise and reaching across the aisle, isn't that something that both parties should start working toward?
Well, I remember I was at a town hall in New Hampshire when I was running for president, and a man stood up at the back of the room, and he said, "Governor Romney, do you believe in compromise?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I can't vote for you then." I said, "Are you married?" And I think what we had was a failure to communicate in my part in that regard. And I say that because first, I think he and I were passing each other. I was not responding to the question he was asking, and that's because of this. I think he was saying, "Do you want to compromise your principles?" And the answer is no. We don't compromise our principles. There are some people who are willing to compromise their principles. And there are times, if you've been in politics, you look back and you say, "You know what? I compromised my principle there. I wish I wouldn't have." All right? And you admit that honestly. But we look for people who will stand by their principle and admit it when they don't and correct it if they've strayed from their principle. But on policies, all right, we have our principles, and then we have policies that we think surround those or are consistent with those principles. But, on policy, sometimes we learn as time goes on, well, gee, circumstances are different than I thought. Maybe this thing that I didn't like is working better than I imagined. Mm-hmm. And so policies you can learn from and see if there's a way to find common ground. I mean, I got to know Ted Kennedy when I was governor. He was a remarkable guy. We disagreed on almost everything, politically. And yet, from time to time, we came together and found common ground. And I found as a governor, if I needed help on something, I could pick up the phone and call Senator Kennedy, and he was there. He helped. It was amazing. I was shocked. Someone so different than me politically cared just as deeply as I do about the country. And we could find some places we could work together. Do I believe you can reach across the aisle? Absolutely. And I'm seeing that today. I know that on some of the big battles going on in Washington, the perception is that's not happening. But I mentioned Dodd-Frank. It happened there. It will happen more. It takes more people willing to say, I'm going to make that effort. I also think it helps to have people that are old as buzzards and as I say, my future is behind me. And so I'm not so worried about the next election. People say, "Are you gonna run multiple terms like Orrin Hatch?" I said, "If I ran as often as Orrin Hatch, I'd be 112. No, I'm not going to do that."
On Russia, Governor, during the 2012 campaign, you famously warned of the Russian threat. Many dismissed your concerns. what should our policy toward Russia be, particularly in the wake of what appears to have been interference in our elections in 2016?
And let me just elaborate on that. I felt at that time in 2012 that Russia was our greatest geopolitical adversary. Political. I wasn't expecting them to launch some kind of a warhead towards us or military action against us, but they were a geopolitical adversary. Basically poking us wherever they could and supporting the world's worst actors, from Kim Jong-un to Assad and others, and see them playing on that geopolitical stage, at that point, quite effectively as an adversary. The greatest threat, I thought, came from Iran becoming nuclear, North Korea with their nuclear plans, North Korea selling nuclear technology to the Syrians at that point and to the Pakistanis and others. So the greatest threat to us was the nuclearization of Iran and North Korea. Today, if you were to say what is the greatest long-term challenge to us geopolitically, it does include Russia, but it probably is more China than Russia, just because China's economy is growing dramatically. They're making a very substantial investment, not just in their nuclear capacity, but also in their conventional capacity, in their submarine capacity, their cyber warfare capacity, their space capacity. Russia also has made a very substantial investment in modernizing their nuclear capability. So we face some challenges on those fronts. The real battle going on, in my opinion, and it's not, I don't mean that in a military sense, but in a global leadership sense, is between those countries that believe in free enterprise and personal freedom, collectively we call the West, where we are the leader, and those that believe in a form of free enterprise, which, by the way, they having adopted a form of free enterprise has made them economically powerful, but not personal freedom, but instead authoritarianism. Russia's an authoritarian state, China's an authoritarian state, the jihadists are authoritarian, and this is the great battle that's going on. And the great challenge we have is on the world stage to show that free enterprise married with freedom is the superior model. And it flows in part from our fundamental faith in the dignity of the human person. And that's I think the challenge we have going forward. We're going to have to keep up economically, militarily, and so forth. But the challenges, I think, are amongst ourselves to recommit ourselves to the things that made us the greatest nation on earth, and keep us as the greatest nation on earth, and keep freedom and free enterprise as the most successful formula for happiness and the pursuit of happiness the world has ever known.
On the immigration issue, Governor, you are very critical of the Trump administration policy of separating families.
Yes,
yes. Where do you stand on immigration in general and immigration reform more broadly?
This is one of the great, tragedies. The separation of children from their parents at the border, the lack of progress we've had after how many years of talking about immigration reform? I mean, it's gone on and on and on. My goodness, can't we come together on this? I mean, we have our bedrock principles, but the policies the president began this year by saying that he was willing to have 1.8 million dreamers remain in the country legally. That was an offering, a negotiating position that had great potential to get progress, but somehow nothing happens. And I'm not there to know exactly where the blame lies, but it just drives me nuts. We've got to be able to deal with this. So, I have my answer as to how I'd like it to be, but you know what? I'm willing to find some differences in here to make it work. What I'd like the 1.8 million. These dreamers, by the way, President Obama said to them after I lost, President Obama said to them, please register, come online, and you'll be able to stay in the country legally. They relied upon that. I happen to believe that as a country, people have the right to expect that they can rely upon the promise of a president of the United States. Even if I didn't agree with him at the time, they relied upon his commitment. And so in my view, those 1.8 million ought to be able to stay in the country legally. If they want to become citizens, I think they should have to get in line with everybody else who wants to become a citizen. I also believe that the president's right when he talks about a merit-based system, which means that, yes, family reunification, particularly for an immediate family, is one element, but so is language ability. Do people have the skills that we need for our economy? Will they disrupt the labor pool in a certain area? So I'd like to see our legal immigration system much more transparent, so you don't have to hire lawyers to get here legally. Register to say you want to get a green card, be able to go on the computer and see where you stand, what kind of skills do you have to get points for having these various features, and you move to the top of the list based upon how long you've been on the list and what things you've done to prepare to become a legal resident of the U.S. I mean, so that would be the approach that I would pursue. I do think that the lottery system we've had is not effective for us. Let me mention one other thing that may seem strange, but and I don't know that anyone has said this out there, and you may come back and tell me I'm absolutely nuts to even suggest it, but you know, I've been across my state of Utah and have seen in various communities. Utah is the fastest growing state in the country, by the way. Fastest growing state, fastest growing incomes in the country, lowest unemployment rate in the country, and yet it has 11 counties that are shrinking. And these are counties in rural Utah, agricultural based in many cases, and they need harvest workers for the agricultural crops. And the idea that the federal government decides how many agricultural visas to give out doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I think the states ought to say, here's how many we want. Mm-hmm. Here's how many agricultural visas we'd like you to give out. Then they give them out and they come to work in that state and go home at the end of the harvest period. I'd let states decide how many of these temporary agricultural visas to offer, and then let the voters in a state decide whether that was a good policy or not. So, you know, I like to get things back to the state to the extent possible. But I'm willing to work across the aisle and with our president on this. I do think that there is potential for accomplishment here. I'm just worried that people in politics, I won't point to one party or the other here, but people in politics have found it useful not to solve this issue and to use it as a wedge issue to activate their base. And the cost to human life, by that I don't mean people are necessarily dying, although that may be happening too, but the cost in human suffering by virtue of not resolving this is so high. I want to get it resolved.
Very good. On trade, we've just learned I think the good news of the NAFTA agreement with the trilateral U.S., Mexico, and Canada being approved, the so-called United States, Mexico, and Canada agreement. But in recent decades, Republicans have been the party of free trade, as you well know. And President Trump seems to be breaking with that tradition by levying tariffs on a number of countries, including not only countries like China, but also our allies. And so he's recently announced new tariffs, not only against China, and there's talk of a trade war. How do you view the president's tariff policies per se?
You know, I don't profess to understand exactly what's in the president's mind with regards to his trade policies. I think there is, well, in my view, if his trade policies and use of tariffs is designed to concentrate the minds of our trading partners around the world to put in place better trade deals for us, then more power to him. If we're talking about long-term permanent tariffs, that's a bad thing, in my opinion. Long-term permanent tariffs will be a tax on Americans and I think disruptive to our economy and to our competitiveness globally. I don't believe in long-term trade barriers. But sometimes you put something out there that you know is going to frighten some other people and make them concerned, and to get them come to the bargaining table and work out something that's a better deal. I think there's no question. Those of you who've looked at China over the years have recognized, and I think, you know, when the Iron Curtain came down and China adopted free enterprise of a sort, it was our desire to have them come into the WTO to become part of the world economy and cease from being this free radical that could blow things up in some way, economically or otherwise. And so we wanted to have them part of the world economic system. And so we kind of looked the other way and gave a better deal than perhaps they were giving us. And you know, if a company in the United States wanted to go there and build a facility, why they were told, well, you got to do this 50-50 with a Chinese company, which, by the way, is going to take advantage of your technology and become a competitor down the road. We sort of looked the other way, and tariffs were more one-sided, and currency manipulation was a way of life on their part. And at some point, President Trump said, hey, enough already, and said, hey, we're going to enter into a trade war. And if it's a negotiation to try and get back to a more level arrangement with free and fair trade, why, we will benefit from it. But if it meant a long-term circumstance where there are high tariffs between nations of the world, that would not be good for us or for the world.
Do you think it was a mistake for the Trump administration to withdraw from the TPP?
I said at the time, and continue to believe, that I would have rather stayed as a party to the TPP discussions. The president was concerned about currency manipulation, and I understand that concern. I certainly felt that way with regards to China and their currency manipulation over the years. It would be argued, of course, that we were also a currency manipulator. Printing money is a way of manipulating currency as well, which we were doing in great abundance. But I would have hoped that we would be able to continue negotiating with other Asian nations. I just happen to think that would have given us a stronger hand relative to China, and would open up more markets for American goods. Look, in my view, we are better off as Americans if there are more goods. If there are more markets we can sell our goods and services to. I believe we will outcompete the world. I believe that the American worker and the American technology and American innovation will lead the world. And I believe if we try and wall ourselves off from innovation, coming from foreign competition, that we'll find ourselves not making the kinds of investments to lead the world. I mean, remember what happened to the old Soviet Union? They walled themselves off. And so they didn't have to compete with the world. And when the wall came down, they didn't make anything that was competitive because they didn't have to. Their businesses didn't have to be at the cutting edge. You need to compete with the world to stay at the cutting edge. And if we do, America will lead. So, so on TPP and on all, I look for us to get into other markets, to sell our goods and services elsewhere. And if we're not competitive, instead of looking to say, how do we put up a barrier to protect ourselves from competition, I say, how do we make sure we can win? What are we doing wrong that we can't win here? Because Americans can win anywhere.
I think you would agree that perhaps the greatest potential for our country, especially being an essential part of North America, is if we can get our act together in North America between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, that going forward, given the population base of 500 million people, manufacturing, democracy, Mexico has a problem with the rule of law, but it is a democracy, that this is really the emerging global power of the 21st century. Do you agree with that concept of North America as really the bulwark going forward, and not so much a rising China or maybe a rising India, but that really this is the motor force?
Well, I think it depends on the course we take. Because, there's no illusion, China is going to be it already is a major economic power, second largest economy in the world, purchase power parity, it's already virtually our size economically. Chinese are hardworking and increasingly educated and highly productive. They're investing in automation. And you wonder, well, why are they investing in automation? They got all these people that are not being paid very much. Why do they invest in all these high-tech tools and automation? It's because their workforce is going to suffer by virtue of the one-child policy. They're not going to have as big a workforce. So they're making sure they can power their economy in the future. We talk about $1 trillion infrastructure investment in our country. The Chinese are making $1 trillion infrastructure investment outside their country. In Asia, in Northern Africa, making sure they have access to rare earth materials and economies through Pakistan and so forth. They're looking very strategically at how they can beat us and become the world's dominant power within the next 25, 30, 40 years. But we have some enormous advantages. One is the advantage of demographics. The developed nations in the world, the baby boomers didn't have babies, except here. Our baby boomers had babies. We've got a big Generation Z and Y. We've got millennials. We've got this huge economic power base coming along. We also have an innovation capacity that the rest of the world has a hard time understanding and has never duplicated. We're the most innovative people on the planet. I think that's part of our DNA in some respects, also our system of law, our financial systems. All these things have come together to allow us to be an innovating nation. And over the coming 25 years, innovation is going to drive the economy. And so our demographics and our innovative heritage will allow us to, even though we're smaller than China, to be the leading nation throughout this century. And by the way, freedom depends upon it. Mm-hmm. Personal freedom depends upon the West winning and the authoritarian states not winning. And I want them to find their own way to finally recognize that personal freedom is the way to go, but that's not the course they're taking. Now with the recent moves towards making Xi Jinping a permanent leader in China, and of course Putin is already that in Russia.
On the budget, Governor, you've often spoken of bringing our federal debt under control. Is there any realistic possibility in your mind of gaining a bipartisan consensus on serious deficit reduction?
You have the Secretary of Treasury here. How can I answer this question with Jim Baker in the room? All right. Simpson Bowles.
Simpson Bowles.
And that's a darn good suggestion, which is Simpson Bowles, as probably everyone in this room recalls, was an effort bipartisan to say, let's have some people outside of elective office work together to see how we can get the budget ultimately to balance. And it was to be taken to Congress and voted up or down, without amendment. And it came close, but didn't quite get there.
Yeah.
It may be the only process, that kind of approach may be the only process to actually deal with this. But I hope you understand just where we are, which is we spent about $4 trillion last year from the federal government, and we took in about $3 trillion. So we're about $1 trillion short. And so we borrow that trillion by selling bonds to other people and other nations. And we're probably never going to pay back the $21 trillion in debt we have. But you know you're paying the interest every year? And when I had the misfortune of losing to President Obama, the day after I lost, I got a call from Bill Clinton. And we had a nice chat for about a half an hour. And he said, Mitt, you know, when interest rates return to their normal level, we'll be spending $750 billion a year on interest. More than we spend on our military, he said. He said, how can we lead the world if we're spending more on interest, sending money to other countries, than we're spending on our own military? And that's where we're headed. And in my view, this is a crying priority that somehow is not focused on by politicians on either side of the aisle, because, by the way, you want to keep an economy going? Just borrow like crazy. Spend massively more than you take in. But at some point, the interest, if we can I think we can keep selling bonds. I think people will keep buying our bonds because it's the safest thing in the world, and America's the leading nation and so forth, and we're the reserve currency. They'll keep buying our bonds. But the interest is going to come and get us unless we get serious about this, and that we've got to do soon.
My last question, Governor, on the elections. How do you handicap the Republican chances in next month's elections in retaining control of the U.S. House and of the U.S. Senate? I'm not going to ask you about your own campaign.
Well, yeah, I'm not a great predictor of these things. I thought I'd win. I didn't. I loved what who was it? Fritz Mondale said after he had the misfortune of running against Ronald Reagan. They asked him, what happened? And he said, well, all my life I'd wanted to run for president in the worst way, and that's just what I did. So I can identify with that sentiment. I don't know that I can predict. I personally think the Republican Party will do better in the midterm elections than the traditional talking heads and the pundits are suggesting. And the generic ballot that the pollsters are coming out with would suggest that we're going to take a drubbing. Republicans will in the House, and even the Senate is up for grabs, at least in some people's views. I think we're going to do better than expected. Mm-hmm. Why do I say that? One is because the economy is doing so well. And people may not like certain things they hear from Republicans, and and be angry at one thing or the other. But if Bill Clinton was right that it's the economy stupid, well, the economy is doing pretty darn well. Mm-hmm. So I think people, when push comes to shove, will vote for a continuation of policies that mean a good job and hopefully rising incomes. I think you're going to see rising incomes, by the way. We're seeing that to a small degree. It's a very early measure at this stage, but I think you're seeing rising incomes. The only way I know to get incomes to go up, by the way, in real terms, is if businesses are doing so well that they have to hire more people, and as they try and hire more people, they have to raise wages to get them to join their enterprise. I mean, I don't know, and that people say, oh, you guys, you Republicans, you're all for big business. This was one of the problems in my own campaign is that, I'd talk about lowering the corporate tax rate and making America the most attractive place for business. That wasn't about trying to get rich richer or business people richer. They're already rich. Rich people do well under Democrats or Republicans. It's the middle class and the poor that depend on the economy doing well and businesses doing well. Because if businesses are thriving and growing and have to hire more people and have to raise their wages, then real wages go up. I think you're going to see that happening more and more. I sure hope so. And so I think Republicans will do better than expected. I think we got at least a 50-50 chance in the House of holding on to the House, and I think we have a much better chance than that in holding on to the Senate. And my prediction is, by the way, in 2020, the Democrats will nominate someone on the far left of their party, and that will spell impending doom for them in the general election, because I don't think the American people are going to go for someone on the far left. So it's how good are my predictions? No better than anybody else's in this room. So I love what Yogi Berra said. He said, I don't like to predict, particularly if the future's involved. So,
ladies and gentlemen, please join me in the honor of having Governor Mitt Romney.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. May I say something before we go?
Yes.
Do you mind that, Mr. Secretary? Do we have enough time for me to say something?
Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. No, I just want to harken back. You were ambassador to Israel.
Yes, and to Syria.
And to Syria.
I was schizophrenic.
I had the occasion, when I was serving as governor, of meeting Shimon Peres, who at the time was president of Israel, right. Not prime minister, but right. President. And I was asking him about America's military involvement in the Middle East at the time. And he said something to me I've not forgotten. He said, before I answer your question, Governor, he said, I have to put something in context. He said, America is the greatest nation in the history of the earth. He said, whenever there's been conflict on the planet, the nation that wins takes land from the nation that loses, because land is the source of value on the planet, strategically, economically, always has been. And he said, one nation in history has laid down the lives of hundreds of thousands of its sons and daughters and taken no land. The only land we've taken is enough land to bury our dead. And he said, America is the greatest nation in the history of the earth. I firmly believe that. And we're great not just because of our strength. With our strength, we could have taken anything we wanted. We're great also because of our goodness. And it's essential, in my view, that whatever you do in your careers, that you recognize leadership is not just about being in power. Leadership is also about having the kind of intrinsic goodness that makes people want to follow you. It's my hope that we'll always be that kind of nation. And I look forward to seeing you as you pursue your life and make sure that America remains, as it's always been, the hope of the earth. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's a real honor to be with you. Thank you.